All right, welcome to technical session number 42. I had to double check that one. Yesterday we talked about all, a good bit or list of, nefarious things that are out there that can cause problems for our systems or, for, that we have to kind of be watching out for and all that kind of fun stuff. Today, we're going to be getting into prevention methods, ways to kind of stop these things from happening or, prevent them from being an issue to begin with. So we're going to break this down into a few different kinds. We're going to be talking about a variety of security prevention methods. We're going to be comparing and contrasting some of these common methods to aid in physical and digital security. Oftentimes, as an IT professional, we tend to be concentrated so heavily on data and hardware that we forget about the physical security. That is an aspect of IT as well. We do need to be aware of this, pay attention to this, and depending on the organization we're with, we would have to work with the security teams as well. We're going to explain several ways that clients can prevent security threats on their own and get into the principle of least privilege with regards to granting authorization to users. All right, behavior skills and mindsets that we want to keep in mind for this particular session. Going to be teamwork, as IT is not an individual sport, especially when we're talking about security. Security kind of takes everybody being a part of it for it to be effective, so to speak. And future orientation, understanding that the things that we are doing right now, the efforts that we are putting in right now, or the lack of efforts that we are putting in right now, are going to directly affect our outcomes of our overall goals. All right. So, prevention methods. It's a few different kinds that we'll get into here for this particular session. But there are some basic elements that we're going to want to kind of focus around for this particular session. One is going to be physical security, or elements that can be added to your environment to kind of help and aid in either preventing people from being able to access areas they shouldn't, being able to access your systems, and or working as just a deterrent. We're going to get into digital security, which will basically trying to keep harmful data and malware out of our systems. We're going to get into user education because unfortunately, the overwhelming majority of security breaches or systems issues, things like that, are from users. It's not from our firewalls being ineffective. It's not from anti-malware not being up to date. Typically, an employee clicking on a link, or responding to an email that they shouldn't, something along those lines. We're going to get into the AUP, or acceptable use policy, with regards to employees. And finally, the principle of least privilege, which is essentially summed up, only give them bare minimum what they need to do their job, nothing more. All of this is to minimize our surface attack area. All right, here's some examples of physical security. We're going to kind of go through all of these here a little bit. From locked doors all the way down to privacy filters. We're going to kind of go through these one at a time and talk about them, explain them if you're not familiar with what they are. We will get into it. So first one, locked door, seems like a simple thing. Unfortunately, it is not always used. My previous organization that I was with, when you would walk in, the office, like the front door, you open up and it would tee off, and you had the executives off to the left, you had operations off to the right, and right in front of you was the server room. Why this was right by the front door, I have no idea, but it was never closed. It was always wide open. So anybody who came in, there was nobody there who would pay attention. You could literally just walk right into the server room. Full access to it. No cameras in there, nothing. So a simple locked door can at least work as a barrier. You know, and it could be a simple key lock, it could be a number padlock, it could be a badge. So long as there is a physical barrier that is locked between the person and your systems. Is it perfect? No. Does it help? Yes. Locks, for the most part, just keep honest people honest. Someone who is determined to get to your systems are going to eventually find a way. So we need to create layers of security. There is no one thing that's going to be your end all be all. If you have a substantial server room, and if it's not just a couple of switches and a hub or whatnot, or a couple of switches and a router, maybe you want to have an alarm on this door as well. So it can alert to the attention of anybody in the area or to the security team or guards or whatever, that there has been, you know, somebody unauthorized accessing an area they should not access. So locked doors. Physical security examples, another one that we have is the man trap, which is essentially, it is a small room with two doors on it, typically not so that the person can reach both, or both doors cannot be opened at the same time. So the person has to come in, close the first door, and then they authorize through security and then open the second door. This has been renamed recently. It is now called an access control vestibule. And I think that is just absolutely a mouthful. Man trap seems to work pretty well anyway. So depending on who you're talking to, it will refer to as one of those two items, either an access control vestibule or a man trap. And depending on the place you're at, you may have a security guard or window in the middle or on either end. But the main point is, two people wouldn't be, you know, able to get in there at the same time. It prevents things like tailgating and piggybacking, and both doors cannot be opened at the same time. All right. Cable locks. This is another one of those. Locks keep honest people honest. It is a physical locking mechanism that will, you know, secure a laptop or a monitor or an all-in-one machine to the actual table or something that is going to be hard to move. Is this foolproof? No. Can somebody cut the cable? Yes. Won't be easy, but they can do it. However, it's much better than somebody quite literally just walking by the table and just picking up a laptop on their way. Again, we're creating layers. There is no perfect solution. All right. Securing documents, passwords, shredding. One, don't write passwords down on pieces of paper. Please don't write passwords down on a Post-it note and stick it on your monitor. That it has, unfortunately, happens all the time. Especially now that people work from home. And then they'll take a picture of their monitor or something like that, like when IT is like, yeah, I can't seem to get into my system. Oh, can you show me what's going on? Sure. Take a picture of it, and there's their password right there. The other thing is documents. You know, many companies produce a huge amount of paper. I know this was a major issue in logistics. There's lots of sensitive information on these documents, like account numbers, personally identifiable information, routing information, value of products, all this kind of stuff, proprietary information. All this can be on these documents. And hackers are not above dumpster diving to find information. People will write down sign-ins and passwords on pieces of paper and then just throw the piece of paper in the trash thinking it's no big deal. For many years, diving through the dumpsters of corporations was extremely fruitful in finding information out about the company so that you can make investment, decisions based on those companies. You can find access to accounts, you can find access to systems, all that kind of fun stuff, just by spending a little bit of time going through dumpsters. So companies have become a lot more in tune with the kind of paper that goes out. And basically they'll have trash cans that are for standard trash and then all paper all paper will get put into bins, and you'll either have like companies come by and they'll do the industrial shred thing, or they have shredders on site. We had one in our office because our office manager was exceptionally paranoid. It turned all the paper into powder. Like, it didn't even shred it into confetti. It was powder when it went through these shredders. And then they have some that are even more than that will shred it, and then they will mix in something with it, and it turns it into like a mush. So it makes it absolutely impossible for you to, put the papers back together and get any useful information off of them. ID badges. It makes, lets you know people are actually supposed to be there. Lets you know who they are, what their access level is, can they be there? A lot of places will have multiple floors. Each floor will have different levels of access, and the badges that they wear will have different colors based upon their level of access or which floors they're allowed to be on, so that security guards can actually tell from a distance if they're supposed to be there or not. So it'd be ID badges. Key fobs. These are little, things that go in your keychain. Pretty nice. They'll emit like a radio frequency, a little RFID tag or something like that. And they can be used to grant you access to the building or the office or special areas and stuff like that. And this can be a part of a multi-factor system, because this would fall under the something you have category. Biometrics, all the fancy stuff. So biometric data is basically, this falls under the something you are category. And this can be anything like a palm scanner. If even you've been to the hospital recently, they read the veins in your palm now. Like, once you get your records set up, you literally you set your hand down on a scanner, reads the veins in your palm, and it's as good as a fingerprint. That way they can verify you are who you say you are. So that's a biometric reader that they use. Retinal scans, where they're scanning your eyes. They have iris scanners, which are reading the color of your eye, because even that is as unique as a fingerprint. The retina is a little bit more unique, but it's also more invasive. And then you have fingerprint, facial recognition, all this kind of fun stuff that's kind of becoming more and more part of our daily lives. But these are also methods that you can put in place to restrict access to certain areas having biometric readers. DNA would be a little extreme, but who knows what the future brings. What was the movie Gattaca, where every time they had to enter the building, they had to get the thumb pricked and check their blood to see who they were. All right, RFID badge. This is similar to the key fob, but this would actually be in the badge itself. No contact technology. And you can use it kind of as part of your access card. It can also be a part of the ID badge itself, or it could be a secondary unit. Most companies keep them separate because it's a little more expensive to make an ID badge for an individual person with the RFID in it. So they have the RFID cards that they can just reuse, and they attach them to badges that are just photo IDs essentially. Smart cards. Best example we have for these would be like your old school CAC cards or port cards in transportation, CAC for military. And they have a little gold chip built into the card, much like our credit cards do now. But roll back the clock about 5-10 years. This was not used on credit cards. It was strictly used in ID badges and for high security areas. But much more common nowadays. It's basically a card reader, and it has all your pertinent information on it and what access you should have. And it's hard to kind of duplicate at that time. Questions so far?
Is there a difference between RFID or key fob?
One is a square card, and the other one is a little tab that goes on your keychain. They both use RFID technology. So it's just basically its location. So one would kind of go in your wallet or on your bandolier, and the other one would go on your keys.
Okay.
So same technology, different location.
Can you go back some slides? I can't remember which one it was. So let's see. Nope, not that one. Not that one. That one.
Oh, that was the one?
Yep, number 3.
Yeah, there we go.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. You good?
Yep, I'm good.
Cool. All right. So next, tokens. These have become quite popular over the last few years. These can either be a hardware token or a software token, or physical or software. So physical would look something like this, like a little key fob or USB or something that you would carry along with you, and it would generate a random code that changes depending on the company, but usually it's about every 2 minutes. So it generates a new code about every 2 minutes. Used to be high-end bank accounts would issue these to their patrons because it was a much more secure way to, prevent unauthorized transfers and stuff like that, because they would have to have this token with them. These have become a lot more readily used. They're much, they have smaller ones that can be, used for keys, but they have larger ones that will issue a new key about every 2 minutes like this. And they have software versions that you can download on your phone and use. Some of them are free. But you just have to double check with whatever accounts you're using, be it your banks or whatnot, what keys that they are compatible with. But you can use these things for a variety of things. This is a little bit different than them sending a push code to your phone. This is one that is always with you. All right, next one's kind of simple. It's just an entry control roster. It's a list at the door. Sorry, you're not on the list. So you keep a list of people who are authorized, and maybe a list of guests who are going to be coming that day, things like that, so that the guards are aware. They can verify everybody as they're coming in, double checking, making sure they are allowed to be there. If somebody is no longer allowed to be there, they can be removed from the list, so that they can be stopped at the gate or at the door or wherever you have your guard stations at. Lastly, privacy filters. These, we think we talked about these yesterday, but this is just a simple film that you would add to your either your monitor or your phone or what have you. And it's like the old school twisted pneumatic screens where you have to be right in front of it to be able to read what's on the screen. If you get off to the side either way, the screen gets blacked out and you can't see what's on there. So this minimizes shoulder surfing, because somebody who is going to be off angle is not going to be able to read what's on your screen. Other things to kind of keep in mind with regards to security, physical security, perimeter fences around the property. What they call bollards, which bollards are basically big steel tubes filled with concrete that you use to prevent cars from crashing into the front of the building or whatever. But bollard fencing is another form of physical security.
Those little short round poles.
Yeah, they're called bollards.
I never knew what they were called.
See, now you're one step up on trivia night. You see them in different forms. Some places try to fancy them up. Like Target uses the big red balls outside as opposed to these poles. So that's one way that they do it. But it's all with regards to physical security. I'm trying to think. Yeah, security cameras. And security cameras either can be working or not working. Their mere presence is a bit of a deterrent. Going into shopping centers and stuff like that, you go and you see those little domes, black domes sticking out of the ceiling, or the black tiles in the roof and all that stuff. A lot of times there's nothing behind those. They would have those up there and nothing behind them. When I worked at Books A Million, this was like 20 years ago, they had black tiles all over the place, no cameras. They're just like, oh yeah, it's just kind of a deterrent. You make people think that there's cameras there. So the mere presence of those makes you think there's cameras there and will make you second guess if you're thinking of pocketing something. The domes do the same thing. Maybe there are cameras there. Are there people watching them? Maybe, maybe not. You know, there's a lot of layers behind this, but they still work as a deterrent. All right. Digital security examples. Kind of work through some of these. First one, antivirus, anti-malware software. As we learned yesterday, all viruses are malware, but not all malware are viruses. And it is essentially installed on each individual system, used to scan and try to prevent things like worms, Trojan horses, viruses, all that fun stuff. Many of them have characteristics and common signatures, so to speak. They have signature lists that they would use to kind of do a seek and destroy and get rid of those viruses. Some of them are looking for characteristics or fingerprints to try to identify and neutralize them before they're an impactor, before we even know what they are. And they use what's called a heuristic algorithm to do this, which is just a super fancy way of saying the behavior of the virus itself. All right. Next, firewalls. We use these to break up major segments of our network and on the edges of our networks to defend the networks themselves from different types of issues, be it viruses, be it spam, be it DDoS attacks, be it espionage from within, people trying to steal information and send it out to the company, all that kind of fun stuff. We utilize firewalls to try to mitigate a lot of these issues. Now, basic purposes of the firewall is to isolate one network from the other, either the internet from the intranet or large segments of your internal network from each other. Firewalls can serve also as a proxy, but not all proxies are firewalls. They can do packet filtering, which they're looking at each individual packet to make sure it's okay to go through. Are they accessing things that they need to access? Are they using encryption when they should not be using encryption? Is the information trying to be sent? Is it valid or invalid? Stuff like that. Or it can use a stateful inspection and basically say, I'm just paying attention to the state of the conversation. If Justin initiated the conversation from within the firewall, then they would assume that anything I'm sending to Justin after that is completely consensual, as it's what he'd asked for. This is how a lot of viruses and malware bypass firewalls, is by getting you to click on those little hyperlinks, which initiates the conversation and then allows them to ride back through the firewall. Questions on this? All right. User authentication and strong passwords. All right, when we say things like strong passwords, what are things that come to mind for y'all? What's your idea of a strong password?
A lot of numbers with a combination of special characters and letters.
So letters, numbers, special characters.
No personal information.
No personal information, all right.
More than certain characters.
So password length, there we go.
Did we say special characters already?
Did say special characters, but it's good to reiterate.
Oh.
What about case sensitivity? We haven't mentioned that yet.
Upper, lowercase.
Upper and lower case, there we go. So various things like that. So we need to have these policies in place. Start getting away from using the term password, start thinking it in terms of passphrase. Don't look at individual words, look at a phrase to use. You know, if you're a 90s movie fan, you could do something like I am Kaiser Soze, or who is Kaiser Soze, or something along those lines. You know, use a hook from your favorite song. Something along those lines. It's going to be harder to determine a sentence or a phrase than it is an individual word with a couple special characters thrown in. So strong passwords. All right. Multi-factor authentication. sure many of us have heard this term before. May not necessarily understood exactly what they meant by that particular phrase. And what this is there, well, there's technically 5, but they use 4 here. And these are ways to be able to authenticate you are who you say you are. And 1 is something you know. So an ID would be like, a key code, a username and password, challenge questions like, what was your first car? What city did you grow up in? What was the first elementary school you went to? These would all fall under the something you know category. Hopefully it's something that you uniquely know. Next, it's something you have. And this goes to your, like the key fob that we talked about, smart cards, could be, keys, it could be a badge, anything like that. And that's why when you use your username and password for your bank, they send you that push notification, that little code that you have to punch in, because the first one is something you know, which is your username and password. The next is something you have the phone in your possession, so you'd be the one receiving the code. Next, something you are. This is biometrics. This is fingerprints, facial recognition, palm prints, DNA if they want to go that extreme, retinal scans or iris scans. So that's something you are. It's a part of you. And then finally, we have somewhere you are, and that's using things like geo-tracking and geolocation, geofencing, to make sure you're within a specific area for you to be able to have access. Like if I need to access the inventory systems at the warehouse, they want me to be physically at the warehouse, not at home. So that's somewhere you are. And the 5th one that they use sometimes is called something you do. And this is where they will use things like the way you type. So everybody's typing patterns are unique. It is just as identifiable as a fingerprint or something along those lines, because you may have micro hesitations between hitting the F and the R key. And you do this every time, which is why sometimes when you type in a password and you do it one-handed, it doesn't register because your typing rhythm or cadence is off. And then you go back and you type it slowly two-handed and it registers. So that's something you do, but that's a little bit more of a network plus and security plus.
What about the secret questions they ask?
Those fall into this something you know, right? So that's what I was talking about, like, what was the street you lived on when you were a kid? What was your, your first pet? Where did you meet your spouse? What's your mother's maiden name? Things like that. That falls into the something you know category. And for it to be considered multi-factor, you have to use more than one of these. So I can't use name and password and then what street did you live on? Because those are 2 something you knows. I can't use a key fob and a biometric. Well, actually, I can't use a key fob and biometric. Sorry. Key fob and something you have and something you are. My bad. I can't use a key fob and a smart card. Or I can't use something like that and then them send a code to my phone. That's 2 something I have. So we have to use more than one in order for it to be considered multi-factor. Does this make sense? All right. All right, VPN. It would depend on how the VPN worked there, Justin, with regards to the somewhere you are. It may actually require you to turn the VPN off if you are utilizing something like if they require you to be in the office, you wouldn't typically be using the VPN in the office because you're already there. So it would probably require you to turn the VPN off for that scenario. And if they are making you use a VPN, it might negate the somewhere you are. You might want to use something other than that as a form of identification. All right, VPNs connects to remote networks, makes you seem as if you are there. Personally, they can unlock regionally locked material. They also create what's called an encrypted tunnel to protect your data to and from the VPN terminal. So this is just another layer to protect data in transit. Then we have what are called DLP, or data loss prevention solutions. And they're essentially set up to prevent sensitive material from being purposely or inadvertently sent out of the organization. These allow you to specify what actions each user may take with respect to a document. So like, are you allowed to print certain documents out? If it's sensitive information, it may not allow you to print. So you may have access to read it, but not do anything else with it. You can't email it, you can't scan it. They may disable your ability to take screenshots, things like that. USB devices may not be accessible on the machine. Then they have some after the fact tools that they use. Like many times when you print out things with the laser printer, there is metadata that is embedded in the document that you're printing out that will tell the whoever looks at it who requested this document be printed, what printer it was printed on, and when it was printed. So if you scan the document, they have this embedded in the text and stuff. Who printed the document, what printer it was printed on, and when it was printed. So you can easily go back and trace who printed out a document. The other thing is, companies will take other kind of measures. One interesting one I heard of, I think it had to do with Tesla. There was somebody who was at the organization, kept leaking material from the company, and they were trying to figure out who it was because they didn't want to just start accusing people and firing people, who were potentially innocent of this. So what the idea that Elon actually came up with was taking a memo and putting a double space in the memo, but it was in a different place for every single person. So he sends it out to 1,000 people. There's a double space that has been moved throughout the entire document. And basically what it looked like was he sent individual emails out to every single person, but it looked like a corporate email, and nobody's going to pick up on a double space. And then when the document gets leaked to the press, he goes back to the document, pulls it up, sees where the double space is, and goes, okay, I know who did that, and then terminated the person.
That's cold. What the heck?
They were leaking proprietary secrets of the company. That was one way to do it. He could have pursued him in court, but he just let him go. So, but that was the way, he decided to do it. It was a non-software way to go after it, really. Sometimes the solution is going low tech. All right. Other things, disabling ports. So we're trying to reduce our attack surface for all of our devices, means shutting off all service and applications that are not required to do their job. So close any port not being used. You can do this also with physical ports on switches and hubs and stuff like that. Any port that is not supposed to be active can be turned off. If we only have 15 employees and we have a 30 port switch, we can shut off the other 15 ports that we're not using. If somebody is coming in, a guest or something like that, and wants to hook up the switch, we can turn that port on temporarily. But this prevents somebody from quite literally walking in and just plugging into our switch. So this is disabling ports. And they also have port locks as well that you can put in, and it actually is a physical barrier preventing somebody from plugging into your switches as well. Access control lists goes along with our firewalls with packet filtering. We have our block or blacklists or deny lists, excuse me, depending on who you're talking to, what you're reading, that's what it's going to be called. And that is basically everything on this list is blocked. If it's not on this list, it's allowed. And then we have our whitelist, allow list, or accept list, depending on who you're talking to. And we would put on there everything that is allowed. And if you're not on this list, it's an auto deny. The allow list is easier, or excuse me, it's more of a pain for IT to keep up, because if you have a sales department, they're doing research and all that stuff, if you're looking at people looking at different companies, you're going to constantly having to be adding to this list. So it is much more of a pain for IT, but it is significantly more secure. A block list, since you're basically putting anything on there you don't want them to have access to, is easier to maintain from an IT perspective, but is less secure than an allow list. So we have to figure out which is more important for the company. So you'll find often in security, we have to balance security with convenience. You cannot have both. So the more convenient something is, the less secure it is. The more secure something is, the less convenient it is. If I take my computer and I put it in a metal box and I bury it in the backyard, it's very secure. It's not likely to get a virus or a worm or anything like that. However, not very convenient if I need to use it. So convenience versus security. We're constantly trying to find this balance. All right. Email filtering. Who loves spam? Anybody?
I like it.
All right.
You know, when it's in a frying
George.
pan.
Brandon, there we go. Sit there and go, like, you know what? At least I know they want to contact me. They're just reaching out, wanting to have a conversation, asking wonderful things like, hey, what's your credit card number? So email filters used to kind of minimize spam because it can get crazy. It can try to prevent things like spear phishing attacks and stuff like that. It may be filtering out specific content of the messages. So if they're not compliant, it could be like, advertising for gambling sites or adult sites, or, come to our website, free movies, no charge. So the email filters can kind of keep a lot of this out. If emails have X amount of people attached to them, they'll consider it a spam because it's a blast email. And if it doesn't come from within the company, it may be blocked out, something along those lines. Yeah, filters do that. And then they also put emails from generation in spam. I noticed that happens a lot too. All right, trusted and untrusted software uses or sources. Where would we get trusted applications? Where are some places we would get trusted places we could, purchase software and applications?
App Store.
App Store, Google Play, Windows Store. Guess you could throw Steam in there on occasion. Where might be some untrusted software locations?
Emulator downloads.
Emulator downloads, there you go. Free movies.
Pirated movie sites, yeah.
Up, sailing the high seas, yeah.
Anime sites.
Anime sites. Okay. So other places where you might get like less than above board types of stuff. There was one out there that was like, it was very popular in my office for a couple of years. It was called Bobby Movie. And there was something really weird about this site, but it was one of those ones where you could get, it was all bootlegs, but it was like movies that you could watch, they were still in the theaters and all that kind of fun stuff. And, but the crazy thing about this, because it's, it's one of those, like, it's obviously not a legit site, but they were getting legitimate advertising. So you're getting like Amazon and Target and all these companies advertising on this site, which was really weird. And I think that's what drew the attention of the feds, because the feds shut this place down. They bring this guy in for questioning, and they're basically, sitting there like, look, man, you're looking at 15, 20 years in jail. And he's like, well, you could put me in jail, or I could give you the list of the 100,000 clients that have been coming to my site and downloading movies for free over the last couple of years. And I can just walk away. And they found that an acceptable deal. So, hey, crook's gonna crook. I think he's fine. You know, he took his money bag and left. And a couple years later, people are starting to receive notices in the mail like, hey, here's your court appearance. You know. So yeah, that was one of those things. All right. User education or acceptable use policies. So I don't know if any of y'all have had to go through this, but in my other offices, it was once a quarter. We had to go through cybersecurity, safety. Don't click on these emails. Don't click on hyperlinks. All this kind of fun stuff. Teaching how to open suspicious file. And it was so boring, but the problem is it's so relevant. Almost all of your security breaches come from employees not following procedures. You know, if you're about to plug in a USB, you know, we don't have auto runs turned on. We scan them before we open anything on them. Also have workstations scheduled to be automatically scanned on a regular basis. All this kind of fun stuff. But we need to educate our employees and make sure they're upholding these policies. And then we have something in place called the Acceptable Use Policy, or AUP, which is a document which specifies what is and is not allowed to be done on the network. This would be signed during the hiring process. Our company went to such an extreme where you had to acknowledge and sign the acceptable use policy every single day when you logged into your computer. So there was never a point when you could say, oh, I've never seen that before. No, every single day in order to log in, you had to sign on to the acceptable use policy. And basically it's setting up a contract that basically says these are the things you will not do on our network. If you do these things, here are the consequences that would likely happen, up to and including termination and or litigation. So that is your AUP, or acceptable use policy. All right. So individual users' responsibility in preventative security. Change passwords according to the company policy. Stop reusing passwords every time. Using the minimum characters, never write your password down. We say this all the time and it seems like a, yeah, no kidding kind of thing, but it is horribly, horribly misused. And people do this all the time. Never share your password or your login with another person, even if it's your manager. If your manager comes to you and says, hey, I need your login for something later, your immediate answer is no. They're a manager, they have the authority, they can do it on their login. Because here is the honest truth. If somebody's going to perform an illegal action, they're likely not going to do it under their login. They're going to do it under someone else's. So we do not share passwords. We do not have shared accounts. Like there should not be a group account that we all use, because if something goes awry, how do you know where the problem started? You never share this information. Logins. Never walk away from a logged on workstation. PC should be logged out every time you leave. I don't care if you're just going to the bathroom. If you're stepping away 10 feet to go to the printer, fine. But if you're getting up to leave the room to go to get coffee, if the computer is going to be out of your sight, log out. We had a culture in my previous company where if you walked away from a logged on computer, what basically happened next was completely your fault. We would go in there, we would change settings, We would send, very crude emails to your manager. We would send stuff to other employees, just a whole measure of stuff to make your life difficult if you left your system logged in. This was just us being, mean to each other and pranking each other, but it created a culture of constantly locking our systems down. But sometimes you're going to walk away. Sometimes you're going to forget. So fail safes need to be in place. Password protected screensaver. After 5 minutes, screensaver enables, and you have to have a password to be able to get out of the screensaver. People are going to receive emergency phone calls and have to leave the office quickly. They're not going to be thinking about what's on their screen. Things come up. We need to have fail safes in place, but we want to try to have the culture of doing these things on a regular basis, but we understand that accidents happen on occasion. Don't use auto login features. I want to stay logged in at all times. It's really convenient. It's also really convenient for the person who comes in behind you. And then be aware of your surroundings when you're logging in and putting in your passwords. This is not just for bank accounts. This is like if you're logging into your system, because shoulder surfing is a thing. Other things, allow approved updates and patches to be installed on your computer, back up any personal data onto verified removable media, being external drives or thumb drives or what have you, and never leave company notebooks or phone where it can be stolen or compromised. But again, we know things happen. So, but we try to operate under these premises on a pretty regular basis. Questions about this? Anybody ever work in an office where they're really high security? No? I used to work in a bonded warehouse, which basically means it's like a customs zone. So like containers would come in from another country, be unloaded there, and they'd be held there until customs could come check on it. So they had to be really high on security. And when I first moved up there, nobody had ever seen me before. They only talked to me on the phone. I got up there and I just walked right on through the warehouse. Nobody stopped me, and got all the way back because I knew roughly where the office I was going to be working was located. So I went all the way through the entire warehouse, through the bonded section, all that fun stuff, got to my warehouse, and then sheer panic broke loose because they realized that their security mechanisms that they had in place were not working, and they could lose their bonded status, which basically means they would lose millions of dollars a year in business. So depending on like transportation, you have different levels of stuff. Like if you do air freight, you have to have certain levels of security. If you do bonding, you have to have certain levels of security. If you have hazardous material, you have to do certain levels of security. And, they take the stuff very seriously. So, all right. Principle of least privilege. It's very, very simple principle to remember. It's essentially only allow the permissions, the bare minimum permissions needed to do their job. No more. This is especially true as those of us who have administrative level access. We only log into our administrator account when we absolutely need to perform a task. And as soon as that task is completed, we log out of our administrator task. We have a standard user account that we use for 99.9% of our day-to-day activities. Because the longer we're logged into that administrator account, the more at risk the account becomes. All right. Also, we need to take into account, should every, like every person in IT doesn't necessarily need administrative level access. You may only need power user level access. So you first need to determine whether or not the person needs that access. And then if they do have that access, they should only use it when absolutely necessary. If somebody needs elevated access within the company, somebody in operations or something like that, maybe they have to run a special report once a quarter. Then when they need to run that report, you would come in, grant them the access, they could run the report, and then you would turn it back off. So this is day-to-day activities. Bare minimum, they need to be able to do their job. Questions? Alrighty. Well, now we should talk about some security prevention methods. Talked about some physical security, getting into bollard fencing, man traps, AKA access control vestibules, locks, security cards, biometric readers, RFID tags, badges, all this kind of fun stuff. Then we got into some digital security stuff, antivirus, firewall, acceptable use policies, and all that. I talked a little bit about what each employee can do on their own to try to aid in the protection of the company's data, and the fact that we need to re-up this education with the users at least a couple times a year. Because we need to be mindful of this, because all it takes is essentially one slip and then your systems are breached. Hackers only need to be successful one time. We have to be successful every single time. Then finally, principle of least privilege, only grant the access that is needed, bare minimum, to accomplish their day-to-day activities. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, revelations? All right.